Now that we've decided on an approach for publishing concerts, let's drive it out with a new test. I'm going to add a new file to our feature backstage folder, and I'm going to call it publish concert test.php. So we'll create a new test case here in the feature backstage namespace, and then we'll create a new test, and we'll call this one a promoter can publish their own concert. So let's go ahead and start by creating a user in our system to actually own this concert and try to publish it. So let's say user equals factory user class create. We don't need to specify anything about this user. We just need them to exist and have access to them in our test. And then we need to create an unpublished concert that this promoter owns. So let's do concert equals factory concert class. And then we can say states unpublished, because we have an unpublished state that we can use. And just go ahead and create that as well, making sure that we set up the foreign key in the process. So let's set the user ID for this concert to be the ID of the user that we created. Now we want to go ahead and make a post request to our new kind of pseudo resource to go ahead and publish this concert. So why don't we say something like response equals this, acting as user, make a post request to backstage published concerts, and in that request, pass along the ID of the concert that we want to publish. So we'll say concert ID is going to be the ID of the concert that we created. Now we have to make a decision about what to assert on with the response. So like, where is this response going to redirect us to, for example? I think a good thing for it to do would just be to redirect back to the index view. So why don't we do something like assert redirect back to backstage concerts. And then let's also make an assertion to verify that this concert is now published. So let's do something like this. Assert true concert fresh to get a fresh version of it from the database is published. Let's run this test and see what happens. Okay, so we get an error that we have no table users. So let's make sure that we pull in our database migrations trait and run this test again. Okay, so there is no factory for the concert. So let's make sure that we've pulled in anything that we reference here. So user and concert, I think that's it. Run it again. We get an error that a 404 came back and not a redirect. So that means that we're missing a route here, right? And we can verify that for sure by doing disable exception handling, using that helper that we've been using for a while now, and just seeing the actual error that we get. So we get a not found HTTP exception. So there is no route defined that matches what we're trying to do here. Let's leave this here, since this should be a happy path case, and any exceptions that get thrown are things that we're going to want to know about. Let's head over to our routes file and define this endpoint. So I'm going to head down to the bottom of our routes file. Again, we'll stay outside of this middleware group until we have tests proving that only certain people are authorized to access it. We'll create a new post request routes to backstage published concerts, and we got to decide what controller do we want this to point at. So we're going to use the backstage published concerts controller at the store method, since we're storing a new published concert. Let's head back and run the tests again, see what we get next. Okay, so now we're getting an error that there is no published concerts controller. So let's spin that up really quickly. Artisan make controller backstage published concerts controller. And let's see if that did get created now. So if we go to HTTP controllers backstage, we do have this new published concerts controller. So let's run the test again. We should get an error now that there's no store method on this controller. And just like we expected, there is no store method, and we get an exception for it. So let's head back to the controller and add that. So public function store. Run the tests again. And now we're getting an error that 200 is not a redirect. So an empty controller returns an empty string with a 200 response by default. So let's go ahead and fix this. So how is this going to need to work? We're going to need to just redirect back to that endpoint for now, right? So we don't have a failing test telling us that we need to publish the concert. So let's start by just doing the redirect. So let's redirect back to a route called backstage concerts index. And hopefully that gets us to a new error. Okay, so now we're getting failed asserting that false is true on line 31. And that's failing to assert that the is published state of the concert got updated to true. So it's still currently false. So let's go ahead and update that. Again, we'll just do the simplest thing that can work and work on new tests to drive out any, restrictive behavior that we need to add. So let's just say the concert is going to equal concert find, or no, concert just find. I'm already getting carried away myself here. Concert ID. And we'll make sure that we pull in that model. And now that we have the concert, we can publish the concert and go ahead and run the test again. And now we're green. There's one other assertion and one other little thing I'd like to add here. It's a little redundant because we have tests for publishing concerts, but there's nothing in this test that proves that we publish the concert through the publish method. For example, if we wanted to, we could just change this implementation to say update, published at, and then, a timestamp like carbon now. And this would actually pass, right? Because we're not doing anything to prove that we're publishing through the publish method. So I think the best way to handle that is to verify that the tickets get created when the concert gets published. So let's create a concert with a ticket quantity, say, of 3. And then down in our assertions here, let's do another assertion to verify that the tickets remaining for the concert comes back as 3. Concert tickets remaining. Now we want this one to be fresh as well. For now, let's just inline it, although that is going to add an extra database query that's unnecessary. But let's just roll with it as is for now. And we'll see that failed asserting that 0 matches expected 3. And again, that's because we are kind of manually making it published instead of using the publish method. So now if we switch to using that publish method, with any luck, we'll be back to green. And we are. So we could clean up this extra database query using a tap call or just a simple variable. Just to show the other approach here, why don't we just use a variable this time? So we'll say concert equals concert fresh, and then we can get rid of these calls, and we should still be green. And we are. There's a bunch of other tests that we're going to want to add in terms of like making sure that a promoter can't publish another promoter's concerts, or that a guest can't publish concerts, or that the concert ID is required, that sort of thing. I'm going to do all those behind the scenes because it's really repetitive stuff, but there is one other test that I think is worth covering here. And that is that making sure that you can't publish a concert twice. Because if you try to publish an already published concert, it would go ahead and create the ticket quantity twice, right? Which is not something that we want to do. We don't want to end up accidentally creating 6 tickets for this concert just because we published it twice. So let's write a quick test that proves that a concert can only be published once. So I'm going to just duplicate this test to start because it's probably going to have a lot of setup that we need. And let's just say a concert can only be published once. So let's go ahead and replace this factory call with a call to our concert factory's create published method. So we'll say concert factory create published, and this will have a user ID of the current user. And let's make sure that we import this by at least throwing a backslash in front of it there. And now we're going to want to try and make a request to publish this concert. And then we have to decide what should happen. So thinking about our assertions, I think we're going to want to verify that the same amount of tickets are remaining as were at the beginning, right? So let's expand this a little bit. Let's have a ticket quantity of 3 to start. And we'll make sure that there's still only 3 remaining instead of 6. And we don't have to assert true that's published. We already know that it's published. So I think we can safely inline that fresh call again here and get rid of this line. But where do we want the person to get sent, or what do we want to happen? I don't think this is going to be a mistake that a user can easily make. It's not going to be exposed through the UI if the concert is not a draft. So I think it's fine to just show basically, a 400 style error. I think we could probably safely use a 422, an unprocessable entity response, because it was not processable. The syntax was correct and everything like that, but this concert is already published. So there's nothing that we can do with it. So let's just do something like response assert status 422. And that'll just show like a standard error screen basically, because no one should ever see this through the UI really. So let's run this and just kind of see what we get. Okay, so we expected a 422, but we received a 302. So that means that it was successfully double published. I want to comment this out just so we can see how this fails. So let's run it again. And now we get that error that we really wanted to avoid. Failed asserting that 6 matches expected 3. So double the tickets were created. So let's go back to our controller and work on getting this passing. So I think all we really need to do is add a conditional to the top here, sort of a guard clause that says if the concert is published, then we just want to abort with a 422 basically. So let's go ahead and run the test now and see if that gets us where we want to be. Okay, so what error do we have now? HTTP exception. So this is because we're disabling exception handling. So let's get rid of this call here. And with any luck, we might be green now. And we are. Awesome. So again, I'm going to go behind the scenes and add all the other tests that we need for permission checks and that sort of thing and get this updated because that's all repetitive, boring stuff. And I'll join you back here for something new in the next lesson.